All right, everybody. We got the Great Depression and Franklin Delano Roosevelt's response to that Great Depression, the New Deal. Please use the graphic organizer that you picked up on Friday or download a copy of it from the Google Classroom. Let's go ahead and begin. Alrighty. So let's start with the 1920s and building up to the Great Depression. If you'll remember from studying World War I, the U.S. is doing quite well, both leading up to World War I as well as immediately following World War I. And that's mainly because of the war-based economy. The government is really dictating how to best produce this war machine. It's telling the factories what to make. It is telling workers how to work. And it is producing everything they can for the war effort. Now, after World War I, the goal then is to keep that production going. How do you take those factories that were once used to make tanks and now make cars out of them? And that we see a rejection of that kind of big government control, and laborers and business owners saying we want to kind of get in on that wealth, on that income. So we see a return to laissez-faire capitalism, very similar to what we're going to see during the Gilded Age, of businesses saying, let us do the majority of the work here, let us make the money. And ultimately, the argument that's going to be made for that is this idea of trickle-down economics. That if businesses and large corporations are making a lot of money, that money will trickle down through the economy by making more factories, by hiring more people. Those people will then buy more things, and then the economy will boom. Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover are going to be our three Republican presidents during the 1920s that push that theory of economics and laissez-faire government. And with that, laissez-faire capitalism comes kind of a backsliding of what the progressive era had done. Antitrust enforcement, trying to break up those big companies, is going to be relaxed, allowing companies to do a little bit more colluding and organizing. There's going to be big tariff, that we're going to have big tariffs once again, especially after World War I, which we'll talk about in just a second. And, again, as similar to the Gilded Age, with when you allow people in power, whether it's government or businesses, to kind of do as they please, we're going to see corruption. We're going to see people take advantage of that power. In the 1920s, we're going to see quite a few scandals. The most notable one being the Teapot Dome scandal. And this is over oil reserves and deals between business and government. This is happening under the Harding presidency. So in many ways, we see a return to Gilded Age politics. For those who are jotting down some notes in the margin, listening to what I have to say, I would definitely write that down. This is similar to the Gilded Age. So the 1920s is pretty great. It's great for business. It's great for consumers. Culture is also kind of making leaps and bounds. But what's happening in the 1920s is going to help build to the worst depression that the nation and the world has ever seen. So let's talk about what these causes are for the Great Depression. So first off, we have overproduction during the 1920s, which sounds kind of counterproductive, or it sounds like an oxymoron. So where are we overproducing? Agriculture. We're producing way too many crops, and specifically this is after World War I, where much of the cropland in Europe has been destroyed. Now, when we surge in that production, prices are going to drop along with better technology, and that's going to be tough for farmers. Industry is also going to be doing much better, better technology. The assembly line is going to really be perfected with Ford's manufacturing of his Model T. We call this Taylorism or scientific management, breaking down the production process literally by the second. So we're going to be producing more efficiently at a cheaper price. Remember that when we get to this next one, underemployment. Business profits ultimately, they're going to be surging during this time, but they're not going to be going to better wages or hiring more people per se. They're going to be building more efficient factories. New technology is going to equal fewer jobs. So it seems strange that, our factories are building more and our workers must also be doing well. That's not going to be the case during the 1920s. And we go through waves of that. This may sound familiar to what's happening today. As new technology displaces factory jobs, we see a lowering of that employment. Union membership is also going to drop. More layoffs are going to occur. And this is predominantly, there's connections to the philosophy of government that's happening during the 1920s with that laissez-faire mentality. But this is also going to be very heavily connected to World War I and the Russian Revolution. The Red Scare is going to be at a heightened state during the 1920s because of what's happening in Russia. The next cause of the Great Depression is really a realization that this is a worldwide issue, not just a United States issue. World War I is devastated after the war. Europe is in shambles. Their economy is destroyed, and they have huge inflations, especially in Germany. That means that they are producing money, they're printing money in order to pay off these reparations. And when you produce more of something, the value of it goes down. So literally the value of their money is worth nothing. And you see the picture here of a guy with a wheelbarrow full of cash. That's the kind of cash it takes to buy a loaf of bread. Now, how did the United States get involved in this? Well, remember how we got into World War I in the first place? Wilson and his desire to increase trade among nations. We were trading and lending money to the Allies. And after World War I, we need that money back. So here's the crazy thing that we're going to do. We create the Dawes Plan. So Britain owes us money. Right? Let's see if we can find... Here we are. Alright, so the Allies over here, they owe us $2.6 billion. Right? That was the money that J.P. Morgan had lent to the Allies. Now, Germany owes the Allies $2 billion. But Germany, remember how they're doing? They have massive inflation. Their economy is in shambles. They don't have the money to pay these reparations after World War I. So what does the U.S. do? We lend Germany $2.5 billion. So Germany can pay back the Allies, and then the Allies can pay back the United States. So if this seems like a big roundabout way to earn money back, you're right. There's also major problems with this because of Germany's economy. But this is going to be a very sticky situation that the U.S. Is going to insert itself into. On top of that, the U.S., again, going back to that protectionist kind of laissez-faire economy, we're going to install massive tariffs on Europe, which means we want to discourage the products that they want to sell us. And if Europe is not selling us products, they are not making any money. So we look at Germany here, who we just lent $2.5 billion. They're really hoping to then sell us stuff so they can start making money again, but we put a huge tariff. So that is hurting Germany, that's hurting the Allies, and ultimately it's going to make it much harder for us to get the money back that we want. Europe is going to go further into debt, and we're going to really halt world trade. Awesome. Okay, next cause is back on the U.S. side. Easy credit and stock market speculation. Okay, so credit, we're talking like credit cards. Buying something today that you can't afford, with a plan of paying in installations over a period of time. So, we normally we associate this with people, and that's true. We have these installment plans. We don't actually have credit cards yet, but people are, borrowing money to buy things like cars, like houses, like those nice nights out on the town, in New York City, going to Harlem, living the roaring 20s. But banks are also borrowing a ton of money. Banks are banking on Germany being able to pay back their reparations. So they're going to borrow a ton of money against that, with the understanding that Germany will pay back the U.S. government. That sounds like a sound investment to a lot of banks. And the U.S. is booming in their economy, so there doesn't seem to be a lot to worry about. And with that comes a booming in the stock market. If the economy is doing really well, then people are thinking, oh, let me bet on that economy. I think the economy is going to continue to go up. We call that speculation, or buying on the margin. Saying that I know that Ford is doing well, so I'm going to buy some stock in Ford, knowing that by the end of the year, their profits are going to surge, and so I'll make money too. That is all going to come to a stop at the end of the decade, 1929, Black Tuesday, when the stock market crashes. This is a series of panics where the market begins to dip, and then people freak out and just start selling, trying to recover some profit. And that's going to result in a huge drop. But that's just the beginning of it. That's just this initial little dip. Ultimately, what happens thereafter is going to really make this one of the worst depressions that the world has ever seen. Many businesses, as well as individuals, are not just going to cash out of the stock market, but cash out on their banks as well. Businesses and individuals. And banks are ultimately going to run out of money. I know that sounds strange, but 5,000 banks are going to close their doors because they have no money. People are coming to collect money, and they don't have it. Where is all that money? Well, they are betting on the stock market, knowing that Germany is going to repay them for these reparations. And when the stock market crashes, they lose that money. Germany is not repaying, and we get this cycle of just money just kind of disappearing. There's not going to be any credit, so people aren't going to be able to borrow money like they used to, and that's going to lead to deflation and a price drop. And ultimately, with that deep deflation, when prices drop, like the cost of an automobile, that means that businesses are not going to be hiring people. They're not going to be able to afford more production, and so they're going to lay off their workers. Now, if it could not get any worse, like this was bad. This alone was the worst worldwide economic depression that the world has ever seen. But let's throw one more catastrophe in there to really seal the deal. Remember that overproduction that I was talking about with crops in World War I? Well, that's going to come back and bite us in the butt. Government is going to be instilling policies to really increase production in order to feed troops in Europe around World War I. Better farm technology is going to ruin soil. We are just going to be farming the nutrients out of that soil and turning it into, you guessed it, dust. Enter a fairly average drought and some heavy winds, and you get pictures like we see at the bottom here of the Dust Bowl that is absolutely depleting and ruining all crops in this area around Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, New Mexico, northern Texas. This is absolutely devastating to our farming population, and ultimately the production of food. So what did it look like in the Depression? this is really a time that it's really hard to imagine. The Great Recession, when you guys were in elementary school, I think is the closest thing that we have to this. The Great Recession lasted from 2008 to around 2012, so let's say 4 to 5 years. We're still feeling the legacy of that recession today, but that was, say, 5 years. This is over 10 years, so twice as long. The GNP, gross national product, is cut in half. 20% of all banks are closed. So what does that mean? 10 million savings accounts you've been putting away for retirement. You're going to retire, say, in 5 years or in 20 years. All of a sudden, that entire savings is gone. What are you going to do when you cannot work anymore? 25% unemployment. And that's not including farmers. When you include farmers, that skyrockets to about 33%. The worst of the Great Recession just 10 years ago was just barely at 10%. So this is almost 3 times as bad as the Great Recession, which was really bad. And this creates an entire generation. As we're going to see with the Great Recession today, we have the effects of that Great Recession on a kind of the millennial population who is coming of age, trying to get a job during the recession. That's going to have some long-lasting effects on that group. The same goes for the Great Depression. It's a period of anxiety, uncertainty, a sense of longing and just kind of desperation. My grandparents were of the generation of the Depression, and how they viewed food, how they viewed savings, was like nothing that I think we're familiar with today. This intense desire to save and to just consume every little last bit of the little that you had, to make things stretch a long way, was something that they took with them. And you don't just lose that attitude. Women are going to have increased responsibilities. They're not just in charge of the family, but also in charge of making money, because oftentimes the men were unemployed. Minorities are going to be hit the hardest. Black and brown brothers and sisters are going to be out of work. They're going to be the first to be fired, and they're going to be last to rehire. So unemployment under minority populations is going to be significantly greater than the nation as a whole. And what we have is a mass exodus, pretty much leaving anywhere that didn't have jobs. One of the greatest exodus is going to be from the Dust Bowl area. And these are called the Okies and Arkies. These farming migrants who have lost their farm, have no work, and are going to go to California. 350,000 are going to relocate to California, many of which are going to be in the Central Valley today. That's where a huge portion of that population is going to end up, in Bakersfield and Fresno. So if you're from that area, there are some strong Midwestern roots from Arkansas, from Oklahoma, in the Central Valley. Steinbeck in The Grapes of Wrath is going to describe that experience in his novel, The Grapes of Wrath. It shows the hardship of those individuals. Really, the lack of work. They're going to go to California with the promise of being employed, but get there and realize that, well, California's in a depression too. And then the intense discrimination against the Okies, from Californians not wanting more people coming to their state to compete for jobs. There's going to be elements of classism against the Okies, discrimination and exclusion from that migration. So what do? How do we fix this catastrophe? Enter Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his New Deal. So Depression happens in 29. Roosevelt is elected in 1932. What happened in between there? Well, this guy Hoover is going to be the president, and he is one of the most unlucky individuals on the planet at that time, because he just happened to be president while the Depression happened. Now, unfortunately, he didn't do anything to help the Depression either. He is still under that philosophy of laissez-faire capitalism, and he was really hoping, let's just hope that the government or that the economy just fixes it. So he'll do some things like develop the Hoover Dam, which is a big infrastructure project, and that will create some jobs, but it won't be enough. His Hoovervilles, the homeless camps that we see up here outside the outskirts of major cities, are going to be what people really see, and that was kind of his impact. Enter FDR, Roosevelt. He is this amazing personality. He is well qualified, well educated, has an amazing attitude and charisma. And his wife is amazing too. She is going to be pretty, like literally his better half to help with policies. And also, you know what, the campaign for the 1932 election was really anybody but Hoover. So he kind of had it made. So his philosophy, the New Deal, that government is the solution. And if that sounds familiar, it should. This is the progressive roots that government can serve to help the people and the economy. This is going to be highlighted by a Keynesian economic policy. You'll learn more about this in economics, but the idea here is that if you are in a depression, do the opposite of what you think you should do. Spend more money. Now, let me do a caveat here. Individuals, if you are short on cash, the idea is not then to get more credit cards and buy more stuff. That doesn't work for individuals. We're talking about governments here. When a government is in a depression, Keynes said you got to spend more money until your economy is moving again. It's like putting jumper cables on a car to jumpstart that engine. He's going to surround himself with some incredibly talented individuals. It's called his Brain Trust. And they're the most educated and diverse set of advisors that the president has ever surrounded himself with. We haven't seen this in the presidential cabinet really ever. And that really is based on his progressive roots. He is also going to start a new way to connect with the American people. Fireside chats. These are radio broadcasted where the president his words are literally transmitted into the homes of every American on a monthly basis to touch bases with the American people, to give them a pep talk, to tell them that things are going to be okay. And I cannot underexplain how impactful that was for Americans to hear the president say, hey, it's going to be okay. Here's what we're doing. Hang in there. It's going to work for you. And that's going to result in the longest serving president we've ever had. He is going to be elected 4 times. Never came close to that. In fact, laws will be created after Roosevelt to, restrict the length of serving for a president to 2 terms. So what was his plan, his New Deal? We break it up to recovery, relief, and reform. So let's talk about the recovery. First off, we have the bank holiday. So immediately, Roosevelt goes into action. He says, close the banks, and we're going to reorganize them. So people can't just keep taking money out. He's going to then install the Emergency Banking Relief Act, which is going to be a government regulation of all transactions and trying to get money back into the banks. He's going to establish the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corp. And that's going to require that if you are going to be a bank, you must buy into this system, and the government will back individual deposits up to $5,000. So if we have this problem happen again, the government will back it up, you and your savings up to $5,000. Homeowners Loan Corp will be installed to bail out middle-class homeowners to help them keep their home. The Farm Credit Administration will provide low interest rates to farmers so they can try and keep their farms. So the first thing he does is try to recover financially. How do we get money back moving in the economy? And it's mainly around keeping your money in your bank and keeping your home or farm. All right, relief. The biggest thing that is facing America is unemployment. It's not hyperinflation like in Germany. We just need jobs. And so he's got a ton of programs. We're just going to talk about a few here. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration, that is giving money to states, really for soup kitchens. Get people eating, get them a breakfast, get them a dinner so they can actually have some energy to work, because that's how bad we are. There are millions of homeless in America. Public Works Administration, the PWA. This is building roads, bridges, housing, schools, to get America back to work for these infrastructure projects. The CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps. This is for young men who would be just entering the workforce but now don't have a job. Give them a shovel, go dig a ditch. Get on federal land and dig irrigation. Do some, what's the word? Refurbishing of natural lands. Do something to get them going and to make the natural places kind of more sustainable. The WPA, Work Progress Administration. This is construction jobs, but mainly jobs for the arts. This is the idea of, hey, let's boost their morale. Let's pay artists to make murals. Let's pay actors and actresses to put on plays at low cost, so people have something to look forward to. Let's make this a happy place and boost morale. It's going to be one of the most successful ones. 3 million people are going to be employed. All right, more relief. How about farmers and rural lives? The TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. At once, this is an infrastructure project meant to bring water control and electricity to the Tennessee Valley. One of the poorest areas in not just the country, but the world. This is really a backwater of underdevelopment. Most people did not have electricity in the Tennessee Valley. Few people had access to reliable running water, and many were susceptible to floods. So they're going to put up dams along the Tennessee, in the Tennessee Valley to both contain those water sources, but also to build electricity. And in the process, they're going to employ a ton of people. The Agricultural Adjustment Act, the AAA, this is subsidizing government or subsidizing farmers to not produce as much crops. This is going to be incredibly controversial, as you can imagine, because people are literally starving at this time, and the government is going to be paying farmers to burn their crops. That sounds kind of crazy, and in a way it is, but the idea here was to raise prices, to make sure that farmers could afford their farms. Lastly is the Resettlement Administration, loans to small farmers to help move them to more fertile land, get them out of the Dust Bowl area and to better land. Lastly, we have reform, and this is mainly taking the form of banking and labor. So first we have the Wagner Act. During the 1920s, unionism really diminished. The Wagner Act is going to give more rights to unions. Workers have the rights to unionize and bargain. This is going to protect laborers from businesses, and ultimately going to increase union membership up to 35% by 1940. And it's going to finally end child labor. Yes, we have still had child labor up until 1940. And it's going to be the Great Depression that really will put an end to child labor, because a bunch of middle-aged men were tired of children undercutting them and taking their jobs. So, that's what it takes to end child labor. All right, stock market. How are we reforming the stock market? Let's make sure that this sort of speculation never happens again. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, is going to regulate speculation that led to the crash. Companies must open their books to the SEC to ensure their honesty. And finally, retirement and unemployment safety nets. Social Security. This is something that is still with us today. This is where you take a little bit of your income out of your paycheck, and the government puts it essentially in a savings account that then will be paid back to you when you retire. This is one of the biggest transformations between the relationship between the people and the federal government. This is huge. The government providing some sort of retirement for individuals. The government has never done anything close to this before. And you can maybe imagine what many people are going to say about this. Social security, it sounds a lot like socialism. So we'll get to the critiques here for our next slide. As you can imagine, the critiques are going to say government is way too big. What is this? Why are we spending so much money? There's going to be more regulations. The government is going to be the largest employer. Pro unions again, it's going to be seen as this red socialism, and these all tend to be saying that the government is turning into this socialist entity. The idea of deficit spending is not going to be positive among economic conservatives. Our debt is going to double by 1939, up to $40 billion. Remember that number, though. We'll come back to that in just a second. And then on the other side are critiques that said FDR should have done more. Father Coughlin is going to be a radio broadcaster who wants to nationalize the banks. Forget these private banks that got us into this mess. We need to bring them under government control. Senator Huey Long is going to be arguing for a minimum income, like more than just a minimum wage, but a minimum income on an annual basis. So both people on the left and the right, conservative and more liberal, are going to be critiquing FDR. Everybody's got a complaint. The other is that FDR is a commie dictator. This is the era of Stalin, and we'll talk more about him next week. But he has a lot of control. Remember, he was elected 4 times to office. And the Supreme Court is going to challenge a lot of the New Deals. The NRA and the AAA are going to be deemed unconstitutional. Remember, the AAA was saying that the government is telling farmers to burn their crops. The Supreme Court says, yeah, you can't do that. So it's going to be deemed unconstitutional. In response, FDR is going to say, well, you know what? Maybe I just need to change the Supreme Court. So he's going to try and create a law that will appoint a new member of the court for anyone over the age of 70. That's not going to happen. People are going to be outraged. What is FDR trying to do? He's trying to pack the courts. The result? Well, he won't get his way, but judges are going to retire and die anyway, so he's going to ultimately be able to appoint more liberal judges to the court and get a lot of his programs done that he wanted. How about the proponents, people who were in favor? Corruption is insignificant compared to relief for people. So yes, the government is getting bigger, but that's what needs to be done. And so this is the worst depression in world history. Somebody needs to do something. The other is FDR was extremely popular. Democrats and Republicans are really going to love this guy. White Southerners, unions, progressive, immigrants, blacks, middle-class homeowners, they all love him. And ultimately, compared to what the rest of the world is doing, many are going to say that he is able to save capitalism and democracy through these reforms. We're not falling into fascism. We're not falling into full-blown communism. FDR is not a dictator like Mussolini, Hitler, or Stalin. And you know what? The debt was large, but it kept the country running. I want you to take a look at this debt down at the bottom here. This spending here is New Deal spending. 40 billion. And people were freaking out about that. But when we get to World War II, take a look at what happens to our debt. $258 billion. So the question is, what really got us out of the Great Depression? The New Deal? I don't know. It definitely kept us from falling into dictatorship, and it kept us afloat. But what's going to surge us out and start making money again? It's that $258 billion war debt, or war money that we are building. It's building tanks. It's building military supplies. One of the reasons, if we compare it to Germany, that one reason they got out of the Great Depression so quickly, because they went to that war economy so quickly. So, yeah, kind of the crazy irony. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that ends our presentation on the New Deal and the Great Depression. Review this. We're going to be looking at a DBQ when we return. Have an amazing weekend.